New Hampshire, August 20th, Route 302 south to Ethan Pond campsite. This will be a 5-day backpacking trip in New Hampshire from the Webster Cliff Trail, head south over the Franconia Range. The AMC bus had picked us up from White House Trailhead parking lot and dropped us off at the Webster Cliff Trail head. It will be about a 25-mile hike over hard terrain back to our car. As soon as the bus had dropped us off, it began to downpour. I had to route through our packs to find the rain gear and the pack's cover and get them on quickly. The bus had dropped us off at the beginning of Wiley House Road. We had to walk the road for about a half of an hour to the trailhead parking area at the top of a hill. The AT actually walks on the road. The parking lot was full and more cars were parked on both sides of the road. This pack is way overloaded and it was extremely heavy. I was sweating in the rain gear during the steep climb up for around 2 miles. This trail was much steeper than I had thought. We had passed several side trails off the AT, and it was getting dark as the rain continued to fall on us. I just wanted to get to the campsite and get out of the rain before dark. We reached Ethan Pond site, and the pond was beautiful inside a nice alpine forest with rocks that led between the tent sites with tent platforms. There was a blue tarp tied up between trees for a cooking area and the bear box. The caretaker was a young woman inside a big tent with a cot, a table with a candle on it, and a shelf with lots of books. She was in her sleeping bag when we arrived. We found out that the sites were $16 and not $8 that I had read in a book while planning this backpacking trip at home. The area would have been beautiful if it wasn't for the rain. We found out that the drinking water was the pond. The pond was more like a swamp, had water in it that was a brownish color. We filtered some water and went to the cooking area to cook our food. It was already 7:30, and it gets dark around 8 o'clock this time of the year. So we had to eat fast. But still, we ended up setting up our tent in the dark. When we finally got into the tent, we had a hard time seeing around. Dave had a mini flashlight. However, the bulb went out after 3 minutes, and he tried to change it in the dark, but he dropped the spare bulb and he could not find it. August 21st, Ethan Pond campsite, south to Stealth site after Zealand Hut. We woke up in the morning to a wet tent both outside and inside. It poured heavy all night long, and there was water that had dripped in from the sides and from under the tent onto the tent platform that soaked the floor of the tent. The sleeping pads was in the water. The sleeping bags were damp, and we found the lost bulb under my pad in the water. I had lost my socks during the night, and it was also in the water under my sleeping pad. All we heard last night was the rain pouring on the tent. No animal sounds, just the rain. It was a really bad night for our first night on the trail. What a way to start a backpacking trip. The morning was cold and damp. Everything was wet. We had to put on wet, cold clothing. Water had poured into Dave's boots, but at least my boots were further under the tarp, so at least they stayed dry. It was much colder than we had expected, and it was also windy, so with the wet clothing, it felt even colder. We packed up all the wet gear that had increased the weight of the pack. The trail was wet, and some areas had water on the trail. We passed over some wet rocks and through some alpine woods and then over a marshy area. There was a boardwalk that went over an area that was not even wet before a small stream that crossed over the trail, but not over the stream, with another boardwalk over on the other side with very little water on the trail. Seems like the boards should have been over the stream where hikers need it to cross without getting their feet wet. We reached an area that went along the edge of a mountain with another mountain on the other side, with a stream in the middle, because it looked like an old railroad bed. We walked along the rock slide where we reached a beautiful lookout of the mountain and the stream below us. I thought the sun would come out and we would have a beautiful view, but no such luck. Misty rain had rolled in over the area. We reached Zealand Hut. It was crowded and the food smelled good. Dave wanted to stay the night here, but we had to push on. I don't like crowds, and this hut was already packed. We climbed up more steeply over large boulders as the trail continued up from the hut. We reached a small stream across the trail and filtered some water, and we spotted an area off the trail that looked flat and went up to it to set up our tent. It was about a half a mile from the hut. It was a nice site with a rock fire pit. Dave tried to start a fire in the pit with toilet paper, but the wood was too wet, and he could not get a fire going. The wind was blowing, and the trees were dropping water on us. We were getting even wetter, if you could believe it. It was also very, very cold, so cold that we could see our breath. I was thinking about bailing out tomorrow and taking the Zealand Trail down to Zealand Road and going to someplace warm with a hot tub, a soft bed, some good food, and maybe watching some TV. Not going to happen, but it was a good dream anyways. We were in the tent early around 5 o'clock. Because we were cold and wet, it would not be dark for hours. We took off our wet clothing and cleaned up, then got into our sleeping bags. We curled up as much as we could in our separate mummy bags, and Dave held me close to him to try to warm me up. I hope that we hear no bear sounds tonight. We fell asleep as it got dark. August 22nd, stealth site after Zealand Hut south to Guyot campsite. I did not want to open my eyes this morning for fear of another cold and wet day. I saw the sun shining on the tent. It was still cold, and the tent sides were still wet. We got out of the tent and started to pack down. The tent was wet and dirty from being on the wet ground. We ate our breakfast and headed back to the trail to continue our hike over the Lafayette Range. Yes, we are pushing on. I told you that it was just a dream. We reached the top of Zeacliff Mountain. It was a very hard boulder climb up. We had a great view on a rocky overlook and pulled out our wet gear to dry them off in the beautiful sunny skies. This was my favorite part of the trip so far. We hiked through a nice flat pine forest for about a mile with some stones, nice pine trees, and some blueberry bushes that we ate. A day hiker warned us of a thunderstorm that was forecasted to come in during the night, and we saw some clouds that had already started to roll in. We passed a trail that was about 0.1 miles to the top of Zealand Mountain. A through hiker had left a note at the junction that said that there was no view at the top, just a sweet tent site. So we just kept heading down the AT. We descended from Zealand Mountain to start our climb up to Mount Guyot, which we had dreaded because we had already known that we were just going to have to go up a steep ascent, just to go down a steep descent down before the top of Guyot Mountain to get to the Guyot shelter, which was a 0.6-mile descent off the AT. It was a hard climb up over more boulders to above tree line. Dave was getting upset because he kept twisting his ankles on the rocks. We had a great view of the top of Mount Guyot. However, it was very windy and cold up here. The sun was in and out, and it was mostly cloudy at this point. We saw the sign for the Bond Cliff Trail to the Guyot shelter and campsites that was 0.6 mile down the mountain. This descent was very rocky with more large boulders to Dave's dismay, and this was just to the sign for the shelter. We had to do another 0.2 miles down off the Bond Cliff Trail to reach the shelter. We reached the caretaker tent with a college girl that was the caretaker. She had come up behind us as we were complaining about the descent off of the AT. She told us that the campsite was almost full at 3 o'clock and pointed to a tent platform that was just above the shelter. The shelter was noisy with lots of youths inside. We set up our tent on the tent platform and went down to the spring to filter some water. It was a beautiful area. We returned to our tent to make our dinner. From the shelter, we heard someone that was talking about making a involved dinner with lots of ingredients that the caretaker was impressed with. It was getting very noisy down there. There was no bear box here, and someone had said that there was no bear activity here. We were getting very wiped out. I started to think that I might had underestimated this section of the trail. It was much harder and longer than I had thought, with too many boulders and rocks to get over and around. I was beginning to think that we would not be able to make the entire Lafayette Range. Saturday was supposed to rain again, and that was days that we were going to be above tree line on Mount Lafayette. We had seen a small gray bird, maybe a Bicknell's thrush, and we had seen some calico asters today. August 23rd, Guyot campsite south to Garfield Campground. We woke up to a cold, sunny morning. We had our oatmeal breakfast, and then we packed down. We began our climb back to the AT, a 0.7-mile steep rocky climb up, and reached the summit of Mount Guyot. We descended for 2 miles through an evergreen forest on a rocky terrain, then climbed up to South Twin Mountain. It was cloudy at the top, so we had no views. The wind up here was cold. We descended very steeply over a rocky terrain to Gale Head Hut, over lots of large boulders. Some of the boulders had about a house-sized drops, with few places to put your feet on, and with about a 5-foot drop to where your foot reached something to stand on. We reached Gale Head Hut on a nice flat open area with good views and lots of goldenrods and asters. We went inside the hut, and it was large inside with a large dining areas and some big bunk rooms. We were really hungry, having only a small breakfast for the morning hike, so we had some minestrone soup, very spicy. It was so good to eat something so good after eating camp food for 3 nights. We both had 2 bowls. The sun had come back out, and we descended to the bottom. We were getting tired of going down the mountains because we knew that we would have to go back up another mountain. We went up a lot of PUDs, some that were very steep and very hard. After about 3 hours of strenuous hiking, we reached a sign for Garfield Camp, about 0.5 miles from here. We started the climb up to Mount Garfield. It was very hard with some ledge climbing, water flowing down the rocks, and hand-over-hand climbing. Dave had slipped once already after leaving the hut. He had slipped on a flat slanted boulder while letting another hiker pass us. I was starting to feel afraid that we might not make it up Mount Garfield tomorrow, because the terrain was so hard and dangerous. It was like going up Mount Katahdin again. I was afraid that this piece was too hard with the packs on. We finally reached Garfield Campground. It was a nice area with some tent platforms. This will be our 4th night in the tent. We set up our camp and had dinner and went into our tent. We were feeling dirty, wearing the same socks and underwear for 4 days, and they were beginning to stink. We were starting to get rashes on our inner thighs. The wind was blowing, and it sounded peaceful. It was nice to get away to the peace and quiet of the woods. But I would have to say that right now, I miss the comfort of a hot bath, good food, and the comfort of my bed. I am feeling really tired right now. August 24th, Garfield Campground, south to Liberty Campsite. We woke up to a cold morning, the coldest so far on this trip. Later, we had found out that it was 19 degrees on top of Mount Washington last night. Today, it started out cloudy in the morning. We climbed up to the summit of Mount Garfield, and again, it was another hard climb steeply over rocks and boulders. At the top, we found an old stone block that was part of an old fire tower. It was still cloudy out, but we still had great views up here, and we could see the Mount Lafayette ridgeline. The descent was just as bad as the climb, maybe a little worse, as it is difficult finding a place to put your foot on something solid that would not roll under your feet. More PUDs between Mount Garfield and Mount Lafayette. We had went from an open top to a pine forest, and up again to an open top, then down to a pine forest, and so on. The sun had come out, and it was less windy today. We began our climb up to the summit of Mount Lafayette. We were above tree line, but we could not see the summit during the climb, and we kept thinking that we were near the top, but it was not. There was just more climbing. The climb was long and hard, and it had felt like it just kept going up for miles. I was beginning to think that we would never reach the top of this mountain before it got dark. We reached a sign that said 0.8 miles to the top. 0.8 miles is a very long way on this type of terrain. We went over more hand-over-hand climbing over larger boulders. Yes, I know that I said this before, but it was like climbing to the top of Mount Katahdin. We had great views up here in all directions, and we could see the clouds around us. However, it was sunny out, and we did have some great views most of the day. We reached the summit around 1 o'clock. There were tons of people up here, and it was very noisy. Some were through hikers, but most of them were hikers that stayed the night at Galehead and Greenleaf huts, and then day hiked up to the summit. The huts bring a lot of people to the summits. Yesterday, we passed a large group of older people, around 70 years old, that were doing the hut-to-hut hike. They appeared happy and having a wonderful time. We had seen them descending South Twin Mountain and doing better than we were. At the summit, we needed to get some water because we were out. The trail book stated that there was a spring about 300 steps down the trail toward Greenleaf Hut. We walked on about 300 stone-like steps down, but was unable to find the spring. A father and his son was coming up the trail, and Dave had asked them if they had seen a spring. The father said that he had seen a trickle of water over a rock a little further down the trail. We had our hopes up, but after climbing down for another 30 minutes, we just gave up. Never, and let me make this perfectly clear, never go way off the trail looking for water. If you do not see the water in a few minutes, then just go back to the trail. I remembered that we had the same problem at the Thoreau Spring on Mount Katahdin. Sometimes the springs are not always flowing. We started our climb down to the Liberty campsite. It was a long, hard descent from the summit with more rocky terrain to climb over, and we were still above tree line. We passed the caretaker for the Liberty Spring campsite. He was heading up just to go down to the Greenleaf Hut for lunch. Wow! He told us that there was no water from here to the campsite, so now we knew that we would have to keep pushing on down to the campsite. He said that there was still plenty of open sites and that it was about 3.5 miles from here. Oh my God, 3.5 more miles. We were already tired now, and we had to push out 3.5 more miles. It was already 2:30, and we had to make it to the campsite before dark because we had no water for cooking and we had more PUDs. Oh my God. The descent was horrific over more boulders and down flat rocks, very similar to when we went down Mount Washington. Some areas had very large boulders that we had to climb over. Some section we had to squeeze between boulders. The hiking book said that there was an area that had narrow ledge walk with drops on each side. However, the writer over-exaggerated this, as it was not as bad as I had imagined it would be. The scenery was great, and we had an excellent afternoon with a sunny, warm day. Even though we were tired and hungry, we had to push ourselves to make it to the campsite. We had pushed too many miles today, and at a hump, we saw a group of through hikers who were a little overexcited when they had got above tree line and could see the rocky climb to the summit. They were celebrating, taking pictures, and hooting and yelling at the top of their lungs. It was getting late when we finally reached the tree line, and we had started to look for an area that we could set up a tent, just in case it got dark and we did not reach the campsite. But we had no water and really needed to reach the campsite. We reached another section of the trail where we were descending, and then we were climbing before finally descending again into the forest. We were a little surprised when we started to climb again. We were really tired and sore and could barely walk, never mind doing any more climbing. It was cool out with no breeze as we started to climb again. Dave was starting to get worried that we might have somehow turned off the AT. We shouldn't be climbing, we should be going down, he said. However, we saw a white blaze on a tree for hikers going northbound on the trail. For some reason, there are often areas not marked for southbound hikers on the AT, but anyways, we were indeed going the right way. Finally, we reached a sign for the Mount Liberty Junction and followed the AT down the trail to the campsite junction. We found the spring and filled up our empty water bottles, and then found a tent platform and set up our tent. Dave could barely walk around the campsite as he set up the tent. It was late now, and we had to rush to get set up and cook our meal. Other nights were more relaxed than tonight, because we were so rushed because we had set up so late. Today I slipped off a rock and banged my wrist against a rock, but it did not hurt that bad. We got into the tent, and I wrote my notes by a small light that Dave was holding for me. That was nice, except his feet smelled really bad, and I did not know how long I could take it. We heated up some washing water tonight and cleaned up the best we could. The warm water even warmed up the inside of the tent a little. We had extra food and ate it because we were actually getting out earlier than I had planned due to all the extra miles we pushed out during the hike, yesterday and today. I was happy about going home tomorrow and happy that we completed the miles we had done. I will always remember the wind in the trees at night, my warm sleeping the cold night, and everything being cold. August 25th, Liberty Campsite south to the White House Trailhead parking lot. I am having mixed feelings about going home. I feel tired and am looking forward to my big hot tub, but I will miss not hiking any more miles on the AT. Last night was cold again, and my face was cold in the morning. We packed down for the last time and prepared to head off the Appalachian Trail. It will be our last footsteps on the trail for a while. This is the most difficult thing about hiking the trail in sections over many years. You have to get off the trail and go back to work and back to daily life. You see the thru hikers packing down and heading onto the trail to complete their hike, and you wish you could too, but you can't. The climb back down was constant and steep. It will be about a 2-mile hike down to our car. We had said that heading north would be harder than heading south because it is a constant climb up, no level area here. We came out of the pine forest and into the hardwoods with lots of birch trees. We crossed a small stream and saw a lot of day hikers climbing up, fresh and clean and smelling of perfume. We knew that we must be close to the parking lot. I had thought that the trail would come out into the parking lot where our car was parked and have a wonderful celebration. But no, we came out onto a bike trail instead with no ideal which way to go to get to the parking lot. We turned right on the bike trail and followed the white blazes. The AT turned off the bike trail before a bridge over a stream, and we followed the stream under the highway underpass. On the other side of the highway, we saw a sign for the Flume parking lot. A hiker was walking from the lot, and Dave had asked him if it was the parking for the Appalachian Trail. He told us to go back to the bike trail and take the White House Trail to the AT parking lot. We had not known that the White House Trail parking lot was the parking for the Liberty Trail. We were a little stressed about this and had gotten a little grumpy. This is another difficulty about doing the AT like this. The parking lots are not always marked properly for the AT, and it is easy to get confused. Not only when you come off of the trail, but also when you need to find the trail from the parking lots. We will always remember this first through hike and the peacefulness of the wind blowing through the trees and of no worries as all you are doing is hiking, eating, and reaching your next campsite. You deal with the weather because you cannot do anything about it. You deal with the terrain because it is part of the trail. You deal with bugs because they are just here. You enjoy the scenery because it is what you came out here to see. There is no worry because you are just out here in nature, and you are looking forward to your next meal because you are hungry. You are on the trail to enjoy the woods and to complete the hike that you had planned to do. When you finished, you are happy that you did it, and you are looking forward to the next through hike, and are most likely already planning it. In conclusion, while we enjoyed this through hike and will have fond memories of this adventure, because yes, this is an adventure. You are also happy when it is over because you miss your soft bed, a full breakfast, a nice lunch, a filling dinner, and a nice bath. It was a great experience, and I will always wish that we could have covered more miles, but we had done really good mileage, and I'm looking forward to the next time that we can get back on the trail for just a holiday weekend or over vacation on another long section hike with the backpacks.